The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Midwest Swing Pod. I'm your host, Mike Berardino, along with Tom Schreier, our co-founder at Midwest Swing Pod and Zone Coverage MN. And working the board, we have Eric Foster today. We're part of the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. And you can subscribe via iTunes, Spotify, any of your favorite podcast apps. Please leave a review, positive reviews only. So we're very excited to have a fine guest here this week. We have a man who's been covering baseball for the better part of his life, his adult life at least, and we've all read him at some point. I'm sure many of our listeners follow him already on Twitter at Jerry Crasnick, Crasnick. I've given it away. It's our old friend Jerry Crasnick. How you doing, Jerry?
Good, Mike. How are you?
Good. So, we're about a month into this podcast thing, but we wanted to have you on because we're right smack in the middle of the postseason. The Twins have a manager search going on, and also just 4 days ago, stunningly, you and ESPN have parted ways. So we catch you here at a crossroads. We have no doubt. We're hoping very soon we'll be reading you regularly in whatever form you choose. But for now, where can we still find you daily or regularly?
Well, right now I'm just on Twitter and social media, but hopefully something else arises here soon, and I have some news. But I'm on the free agent tour right now, so I guess we'll see what happens. But just trying to keep a pretty close eye on baseball, as you know, Mike, and following all the development. So doing the best I can, like you out in the world.
That's right. I mean, well, unlike me, you announced your free agency 4 days ago, and subsequently, I'm sure just an outpouring of people around baseball and around the industry of baseball writing and journalism in general. What has that been like for you? I'm sure very gratifying and humbling. But what has it been like and have you had a chance to get back to everybody yet? I mean, it's going to take a while, I suppose.
Yeah, it's been pretty cool. I think I've been doing this for a long time, and you hope you have some sort of impact. And I've gotten a lot of really, really nice notes from people, especially in the journalism community, but people at ESPN. And it's really humbling and very gratifying. And, it's just, I think, Mike, when you're like us and you love what you do and you enjoy it every day, hopefully that shows through to people a little bit and maybe has somewhat of a positive impact. So I hope I'm not done here yet, but it was very nice to get an awful lot of heartening and positive messages on Facebook and Twitter and just text messages and that sort of thing. So it was mix the good with the bad, but it was very, very uplifting to get all that response.
No doubt, and I'm right there with them. I'm one of your biggest admirers in this industry, and you've always treated me with great respect, and it's been fun to be around you, and we look forward to the next time we're covering the same event. But one thing that popped up in my mind is I didn't realize it's been 13 years since you published License to Deal, a season on the run with a Maverick baseball agent, that being Matt Sosnick. Twins fans have heard his name a number of times over the years. Josh Willingham, Ricky Nolasco, others. How about updating that, or how about a spin-off of that? Is there a possibility? And I keep waiting for the movie deal. I think it's time to get the movie going on that one. And who plays you?
I thought it could have been, certainly. I thought at the time it was sort of an interesting movie concept about an agent with a heart, but I guess that had already been done, right, with Jerry Maguire.
Yeah.
So
different sport.
I just think you could probably write a movie about Ricky Nolasco getting a contract of about $50 million, right? Didn't the guy be put in the Agent Hall of Fame for a deal like that? Do you think the Twins felt like they got fair value for that deal? You covered the team.
Probably not. It did probably lead to the firing of Terry Ryan. He went out and signed 3 big free agents and really probably went 1 for 3 pitching-wise. Phil Hughes, Ricky Nolasco, and Irvin Santana. Irvin worked out pretty well, but even that appears to have come to an end. I do think there's still movie possibility there, and I think an updated version of you spending a year running around with Sosnick would be good stuff. This postseason, we won't bog you down too much with it, but we'd like to talk a little, probably more manager search before we let you go. But first of all, did you have predictions going into the postseason? Did you have a World Series prediction that is already blown up?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, it's about to blow up. I actually went against the grain with, I thought Houston and LA was a little bit too obvious. So, I liked Milwaukee's karma. I thought they had a lot of good things going. So I took them out of the National League, which I think might be an inspired pick. My Cleveland pick in the AL isn't looking so hot, though. They have to score a run, I think, maybe for me to have a shot at this. And, They might go 3-and-out here today, so that's not going to be great. But
don't feel bad, Jerry. You're right there with me. I had on this very show 1 week ago. I made that same Cleveland. I have Cleveland over Milwaukee in the World Series, and Trevor Plouffe.
That's what I had. Yeah.
Yeah, Trevor Plouffe also was going Cleveland over Milwaukee. So maybe in trying not to be obvious, we were obvious, and see what happens. I don't know. I mean, you just can't predict ball. We know that. Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes the chalk will hold. The one thing that did feel right all along, though, is that the Red Sox at 108 wins, it was just classic Red Sox and classic baseball if they do not follow through and win it all, and some questions about the bullpen, et cetera. What would be your level of surprise, in a weird way, if the Red Sox win the World Series?
Well, look, I think if a team wins 108 games, you look at that club and you say, wow, it's but there's always that question, Mike, of is it a team that's built for the long haul and not for a short series? And, I think David Price's performance certainly was a huge disappointment. I think they need him and Sale to obviously pitch well because the back end of that bullpen is shaky. But I felt like David Price, I talked to him in New York about 3 weeks ago, and he gave me the impression of a guy who really felt like this was his time to make a stand and really change the perception. And after 1 2/3 innings or whatever it was, he didn't do that. So that was disappointing. But I think that's going to be a heck of a series, probably go to the full 5. And, I think Houston probably is the best team in the American League, top to bottom, especially with their starting pitching and the way they address some of the bullpen issues. It just seemed to me like to pick a Houston-LA World Series again, as much as my head said, this is the right pick, it's tough to repeat, and but both teams look like they definitely could have a shot at that happening again, and we could have the same teams 2 years in a row.
Yep, the later on today, coming up fairly soon, the Dodgers up 2-1 take on the Braves. Game 4, Rich Hill against Fulte. I'll just go with Fulte there. And then early this evening. Yeah, and that's best. And again, the Red Sox and Yankees tied at 1. Game 3, Nathan Eovaldi, the Carl Pavano doppelganger, against Luis Severino, who had much better success this year in the wild card games than he did against the Twins a year ago. Now, all kinds of ex-Twins. This is a Twin-centric or Minnesota-centric podcast, Jerry, so we're going to rein it in now a little more with that. The fact that I don't think I'm missing anybody. I'm going to rattle off ex-Twins. Tom, you catch me if I forgot someone. But in the current postseason, still with a chance to win a ring, Houston has Ryan Presley, who was tremendous after the trade back in July, 0.77 ERA in 26 games, and they still use him to get to the end of the bullpen. The Dodgers have Brian Dozier, but not using him much. He's had 2 at-bats here in the postseason, and it was really dreadful for him after a quick change of scenery bump, a bunch of home runs early on, but he ended up on the year hitting .215. I want to ask Jerry about his market this winter when we get through this list. Kurt Suzuki and Aníbal Sánchez, famed Twins spring training invitee. I guess he was on the 40-man. But released in March, and then he goes on and does great things. Pretty solid year, 137 innings, 2.83 ERA. But Machado and Grandal got him for homers in Game 2. But just the fact that Aníbal Sánchez, released out of Twins camp, goes on and starts a postseason game is pretty amazing. Yankees are sitting there with old friend Lance Lynn, who really enjoyed his time with the Twins, and but he's kind of a Red Sox killer. Jerry, you might not know it. You probably know. Lance Lynn, a 1.91 ERA in 33 career innings going into this postseason against the Boston Red Sox, and that includes the World Series that he pitched against them years ago, early in his career, start of his career, or in 2013. But and he puts up 2 more scoreless the other day. He, too, will be a free agent soon. And Aaron Hicks, if his hamstring will cooperate, very important part of that Yankee team now, which Twins fans love to be reminded of. And then Eduardo Núñez running around there with the Red Sox still. We love Núñez, former All-Star from a 103-loss team. And interesting that he's still part of that Red Sox mix. Great clubhouse guy and a fine athlete. We like Núñez. But the Brewers don't have anybody officially, although they do have the better Arcia, the younger, and the better Orlando. And they have Jesus Aguilar, who, this is wonky, but he was claimed on waivers, allowing A-Ray Adrianza to go back on waivers, and that's how the Twins got him, but that's probably not very good. Now, Jerry, what is the free agent prospects? What do they look like for Brian Dozier off of this year? And then Lance Lynn.
Well, Mike, I do have to start by saying I'm a little disappointed that you didn't refer to Aaron Hicks as Hicksy. I think you needed to do that. That was a little bit of an oversight on your part. But yeah,
you're right. You got me.
Yeah. But Brian Dozier, I think he probably will have the best hair on the market, right? Which is got to count for something. He's got the good flow. Brian, it's funny with him. I mean, I think going into this season, obviously, just with his, he's a guy who does a lot of things, great power for a second baseman, was hitting leadoff, has made himself into a really good fielder. He looked like a guy who was going to be able to go out this winter and kill it. And then all of a sudden, you never know with these things. I mean, sometimes these guys press, they get off to a bad start, and they don't hit well, and then all of a sudden they start thinking about it. So, for Brian, certainly his prospects aren't as bright as they would have been. And then you figured, well, hey, maybe going to LA might reinvigorate him, and if he has a couple great months, that could really salvage it. And as you mentioned, it really hasn't helped. So I'm not really sure what he's going to get. I tend to think, it might be a little bit of a shorter deal, just because maybe he wants that too, where he goes to a place and gets that pillow type deal and reestablishes himself and goes out next winter, because, this is not the ideal platform year for him. But, he's a better player, I think, than he showed this year in a lot of respects. So I think this year was more the aberration, and whoever gets him is going to be getting a motivated guy who I think is going to be very productive. But in terms of what kind of deal he's going to get, obviously, this was not the ideal scenario for Dozier.
I mean, the qualifying offer, which obviously the Dodgers cannot offer him because he was traded, but what's that, 17.9? So that's kind of like that's the kind of maybe in the back of his head if somebody offered him that, but I don't even see that. It feels like, he's never made more than $9 million in a year. That's this year, based on that 4-year contract. And if he did do a short-term deal, would 1 year, $10 million, somebody be able to potentially? It's so early, I know, but it almost feels like it's not going to be that 4 or 5 year Pedroia type, $75 million range or more. If he does do 1 year, maybe he just ekes into the 8 figures and tries to put up the kind of years that he'd been doing regularly until 2018.
Yeah, what is he? Probably 31, 30. Is he 32? I don't
30,
know.
31, early 30s, yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think he's a guy who we've been around him. I mean, I think he's a great guy to have on a team. I mean, again, a lot of energy, great in a clubhouse, but provides you with that power element out of second base, which not that many guys have. And he really had turned himself into a good defender. So he brings a lot to the table. And I just think that expect that you're going to get that. I looked at the deals for some of these guys of similar ilk, and you look at Daniel Murphy or a Zach Cozart, they were like the 3 times 12 or 13. I think Dozier probably was looking at something better than that before this season, but it's just hard to tell because the market is not very forgiving or welcoming to players in their early 30s, and a lot of them haven't gotten the kind of deals they hope for. So in this case, I'm not sure what he and his agent have in mind, but, I think that's certainly a possibility sometimes is you take the shorter deal and reestablish your value and go out next winter, with a lot better numbers behind you. And, wouldn't be the first guy to have that happen. Ian Desmond, got a terrible deal and had a really bad season. And then all of a sudden went out and got 5 and 70 from the Rockies, so those days might be over, but I still think he's a guy who has enough in the tank that, he probably has one nice contract left in him.
Talking with Jerry Crasnick, longtime baseball writer, one of the very best in the business, and just recently leaving ESPN, preparing for that next professional challenge. And in the meantime, you can read him, keep up with his comments and thoughts on the postseason, which are always astute, at Twitter, at J Crasnick, Crasnick, and on Facebook, Jerry Crasnick. But we only have a few more minutes with Jerry before he has to get on with his wife. And we're very appreciative that he made time for us today here at Midwest Swing Pod. But the fact that Paul Molitor was fired last week with 2 years left on his deal, a Hall of Famer, a St. Paul native, a Minnesota resident and product, and a guy who got the Twins of the postseason just a year ago, albeit with 85 wins and a wild card exit. How surprising was that to you from a national perspective?
Well, probably not shocking, Mike, given that I think, the team did underachieve this season, didn't meet expectations. You had the Falveen, combination comes in, and you think they might want their own guy, but I believe he had 2 years left on his contract at a pretty good, healthy amount of money. So, and my understanding is I think they want him to stay in a different capacity, and they're trying to negotiate something with that, unless it's already happened.
I don't think that'll happen. It does sound like he was fairly hurt by it, but the reporting I've seen is that that would be unlikely. But Initially, I know the people there, I think, were pretty upbeat about it. But, obviously, if he isn't amenable to that, then we'll see what happens. I guess he could just get his money and his contract and collect it anyway, right? So, but I don't know, given the way, Mike, the industry's going, as a guy like Molitor, who's in his early 60s and was a, long-time player, is he what front offices are looking for now? And he seems to go against the profile. So, I don't know what else he might find. And, maybe if he had issues with the front office or whatever and clash, then, in a different role, is that going to be any better? So, but yeah, I was a little bit surprised, I guess, if only because he did have 2 years left on his deal. But on the other hand, it wasn't as if, this year's team burned it up and did great. He certainly gave them an opening to get their guy in there, whoever that might be. Well, there's a handful of openings now. There's 6 openings. Twins, Angels, now that Mike Scioscia's moved on. That's a big name as well. Baltimore's open with Buck Showalter, another huge name, right? Blue Jays with John Gibbons. Cincinnati with Riggleman. I guess Riggleman could still interview for it, but they're looking. And then
he did,
Texas,
I think. Yeah, right.
Yeah, Texas with Jeff Bannister out. And you wonder, are any of those... Well, first of all, any of those, and still St. Louis they firmed up their situation, but Mike Matheny's still sitting out there. Dusty Baker's still sitting out there. Are there any retreads? First of all, you're right. The trend is to go younger and first time, but are there any guys who have managed even recent years that you could see potentially falling into the Twins situation?
Well, look, you have guys like Buck Showalter, who is, very accomplished, but coming off a rough finish in Baltimore. You have Joe Girardi seems to be sort of a hot commodity. I think the difference is now teams don't really want to spend $3 or $4 million on a manager. He's largely an extension of the front office, I think, the way they look at it. So, if you're going to spend a quarter of that or whatever it is, you don't necessarily have to go out and get the big name because you don't even know how well he's going to work under the new modern front office dynamic anyway. And so that's why you're starting to see some other, new hot names. I mean, David Bell, the old, Buddy's son, seems to be a name you're starting to hear in a bunch of different places. And Hensley Mullins from the Giants. I mean, there's a lot of guys like that. And nowadays teams seem to almost look at it as a black mark if you've managed before. I think they want guys who are almost blank slates who will work in accord with the front office. And, your Joe Girardi's probably going to want a little bit more autonomy than that. So I think you have to see what the structure is and what the sort of mindset the team has about the job before you really know what kind of candidate is going to be the candidate they're going to bring in.
Well, we could certainly go on from there, but we're going to stop right now. The code word was biscuit. You were nice enough not to use it. And we're going to let you go on with your life, Jerry, today. And we look forward to reading you at your next stop. There's no doubt that'll be coming soon. Really, forget Machado, forget Harper, forget anybody else you might have been. Dozier, you're thinking about this winter. The biggest free agent on the baseball market is Jerry Crasnick, and he was with us here today at Midwest Swing Pod. Thank you, Jerry. All the best. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mike. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye. So that was Jerry Crasnick, Tom. And, as always, Jerry, with his finger on the pulse of this game and tremendous at trying to figure out through his relationships in the game with agents, with front office people, where markets might go. I didn't get to Lance Lynn with him, but I thought his thoughts on Dozier and a shorter-term contract were right on. I think that's probably how it's going to play out. But let's talk a little more about Molitor and what comes next for the Twins, and maybe what you're hearing. And then let's talk about Sano and what Miguel Sano just went through, and what appears to now quickly have been a bit of a misunderstanding and just a strange mini tragedy, but fortunately no one was killed, but just a weird situation. But back to managerial candidates, in-house already what James Rowson has interviewed, that's not surprising. I've always thought James was kind of a stealth candidate to be even brought into somebody else's situation with his Yankee past, his Cub past, very commanding presence, but never managed. Tremendous hitting coach. But there's people in that on that current staff. I mean, we had Gene Glynn on just 2 weeks ago on this show. You know what we think of Gene Glynn, and, and he has managed at a variety of spots. I don't know that it's going to happen for him with this front office, but I still believe that if Gene Glynn were given a chance to late in his career, a la Joe Madden, manage at the major league level, he would be fully capable of doing everything you need the modern manager to do. Others to keep an eye on, you have Joel Skinner down there at AAA. Rochester, with his background with the Indians, is a well-known commodity to Derek Falvey, and a big reason why they brought him in just this past year. Jeff Pickler, 2 years on the staff, as a major league coach, and so versatile, and former scout, player, reached AAA as a player, just as and he was really charged with and was able to merge analytics department through Jeremy Hefner in the clubhouse, and then bringing and Corey Baker this year as well, and then bringing those shift opportunities, including the 4-man outfield shift, which the Twins led baseball in, to the group, to the players, to Molitor and the rest of the staff, and it seemed to flow. I definitely think Jeff Pickler is a solid candidate, a very strong candidate, and Derek Shelton had a chance as the bench coach to manage the team for 2 games when Paul Molitor was strongly encouraged to go on to Cooperstown instead of staying in Fenway and managing the team that he wanted to stay with. He was torn. He wanted to be there for Jack Morris, but I know for a fact that it was awkward. He used that word, awkward, and it was tough to leave, especially as players Presley and Escobar began to be traded. Derek Shelton handled those 2 days very well. By all accounts, he handled this whole year very well, brought in to be a bench coach when he had no prior relationship with Paul Molitor. And usually you want your bench coach to be someone that you've at least met before. But that was a front office decision, and I would not sleep on the candidacy of Derek Shelton, even though there's not a lot of recent managerial opportunity. He did manage in the minors way back, and he's been around this game now for decades, and the personality for him is off the chart. And then, of course, there's one other name that I would point out, and who knows if he's at the stage of his post-playing career that he would even entertain this, but I would not, if I were the Twins, I would not make a managerial hire or even get very far down the road in these interviews without making sure that Justin Morneau isn't ready to manage, because I know fans really warmed to the type of insight he brought onto broadcast this year at Fox Sports North. I know, having covered him back in 2013 and been around him since then. I mean, this guy has a lot going for him in the baseball realm and the ability to command respect. And increasingly, we're seeing guys hired who basically go straight from their playing career with a short stop off and retirement, if that. So that's a name to keep an eye on. Tom, who's a name or two for you who you would like to see or even predict the Twins will end up hiring to replace Paul Molitor?
Briefly on Morneau, I think my list probably is younger, at least very forward-thinking managers given the front office. The Morneau one's interesting. I just wonder, after them going through firing Molitor, who still had his contract was just the AL Manager of the Year, and most importantly from St. Paul Hall of Famer, seemingly very liked by us in the media as well as people, fans of his who remember him playing for the Twins briefly and his Hall of Fame career. I wonder if they'd want to set themselves up where, it's kind of that old line where the guys are hired to be fired a little bit, that they want to set themselves up with a similar opportunity right out the chute, being like, what if we have to fire him? I don't know how much they think of that, but it does seem like to me, I think they'd go someone a little bit outside the organization, or at least not kind of a traditional Twins guy, the Skinners, the Picklers. For some reason, I'm probably biased towards Shelton because he seemed really cool when he stepped in and seemed like a guy that could handle the everyday nature of it, the ups and downs, something that Molitor did really well. I also wouldn't mind them going the Latin route, given that their best players seem to have that background, who probably would like to speak in their native language, or perhaps less would be lost in translation. It'd also just be very different for the Twins that traditionally had, white managers came from the system, very long, obviously long-term managers. So it's hard there's not much of a sample size, but there's something about that that I think wouldn't be terrible given where some of the best players in Major League Baseball come from today.
No, I fully agree. It would be ideal. I mean, when you see the way the game is trending, the way the Twins organization is trending, and it's just a matter of finding that right guy. You at least have to interview a person or two along that way. Whether you're Sandy Alomar Jr., Jose Oquendo, there's so many that you see what Alex Cora has been able to do in year one with the Red Sox, being able to speak to players in their native language and with very minimal managerial experience before he was bench coach for the world champion Astros. So there's that name more names will surface. I'm sure they'll take their time. I remember coming off of Gardy with his firing in 2014. It took a good 5 weeks to get through it all the way to that final stage. So I'm thinking we'll be talking about this on upcoming episodes as well, Tom, if not all the way into November. Now, you mentioned the ability to communicate with a player in a Latin player in his native tongue, and no matter who the next manager is, there will be communication with Miguel Sano that will be vital in keeping him on the straight and narrow and keeping him focused on achieving what he should be able to in this game with health and focus. Now, a lot of people probably have already heard, but we'll just skim through the latest, which is that Sano report out there from ESPN or on ESPN that Miguel Sano will not face criminal charges for his involvement in an accident in the Dominican Republic early Sunday morning, in which a police officer suffered a broken leg. Sano was leaving a nightclub in his native San Pedro de Macorís at 3 a.m., so they stay up a little later there apparently, on Sunday in the company of his wife, they mentioned, and he had been speaking to police officer Argenis Emilio Gilando, which is a heck of a name, in front of the club. And after the exchange, Sano went to back up his white pickup truck without realizing that Gilando had not moved his motorcycle from behind him. A spokesman for the Dominican National Police told Enrique Rojas of ESPN. In the early hours of Sunday morning, Sano was questioned upon leaving that nightclub because his vehicle did not have a license plate. That's never a good thing, Tom. And he was not carrying his driver's license, which can happen. After he spoke with the officer, the accident occurred. Sano was detained by the police for several hours, but was released and allowed to return home after he agreed to return on Monday to be issued the citation. That also pointed out that this officer, Gilando, suffered fractures to both the tibia, which Sano has the rod in, and fibula of his left leg, was taken to the hospital by Miguel Sano. And the police officer and Sano actually know each other and attended school together. So it becomes a very strange, poignant story. Sano was never charged with a crime because he did not leave the scene of the accident. And finally, Sano offered to pay all of the officer's medical expenses. With all that now, obviously, at first blush, that came out yesterday, Sunday, and a lot of people on Twins Twitter and beyond were like, oh, that's it, cut bait, that's enough of him, or, what next, that sort of reaction. But when you see where it's brought up to date here, and you see how Sano responded to what appears to just be backing up the truck, or putting it in reverse instead of going forward, he's probably rattled that he's just been questioned. What is your take on what needs to be done? What's your conversation with Miguel Sano like if you're the Twins front office?
Yeah, first of all, you always have to be careful to jump to conclusions with anything like this. And this is as written, and Brandon's been on top of it for us. We're just gathering the information and trying to create a timestamp so that if you caught part of this and then later on are like, oh, whoa, what happened? There's no charges. We're trying to kind of piece the story together before formulating an opinion. The issue with this and the sexual assault allegation earlier and the weight issues, and even its discipline with at bats, unfortunately, it continues to paint a picture of a young player who has a ton of talent. We know he's been an all-star before. We know, you go back to the Sports Illustrated writing about the Glimmer Twins with him and Buxton, and how much he means at least to the immediate future of the Twins, and how much of a spotlight there is on him. Unfortunately, to me, it just continues to paint a spotlight of someone who is undisciplined, and even like the lack of license plates and all this. And I understand, I think we should be careful with stuff that happens in Dominican, because there's been documentaries done on this, and the fact that in certain parts they shut off the lights late at night, that you can literally get drinks like on the road, like you would pick up McDonald's here. There's a little bit of there's a reason why incidents crop up in the off season out there, that sometimes are more relative to the environment the players are in rather than maybe the players themselves. But all that said, I mean, to me, when this came up, the first thing I thought of is undisciplined. You need to mind his P's and Q's and understand how important he is to this franchise, and not put himself in situations where things like this happen.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly just want to stay off the police blotter if you're a professional athlete of any sort. If you've already been there for any reason, it becomes incumbent upon you. Who knows what kind of deal he has with Major League Baseball in terms of coming, as you mentioned, the assault allegation that Major League Baseball chose not to penalize him for, but it did say that he would basically be monitored moving forward, or that any other slip-ups could lead to a suspension. I don't think, based on what we're reading here through this reporting as of this hour, that this would rise to the level of another strike. Maybe if he were in Roger Goodell's NFL, he would be suspended for something where often you just have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time or screw up a couple of times, regardless of the level. Let's hope that's it for Miguel Sano. Let's hope that this is just a strange incident with some strange data points, but he does appear to have handled it well from the moment. Once he had backed his truck up over the officer's motorcycle and leg, from that point on, he seemed to handle things well. And we're not hearing anything about certainly roughing up the officer or something. Initially, there was talk of shots fired, right? So there's no talk about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad information. So, gunplay, not something you want to be involved with. Obviously, incredibly dangerous to anyone who we're not hearing about that at the latest report. Maybe you've seen another one this afternoon. But at this point, I'm willing to say if I'm the Twins front office and I call Miguel Sano and put together that conference call with him and his agent, I would want to hear from him in his own words what happened and make sure it jibed with the reporting. If there's anything that was left out, I'd want to know it. And then I would say a couple of things, huge off season for you. Obviously, you say you want to work with the Olympic sprinter, Jan Soriano, and get down to 250 pounds or lighter. You're going to need your proper rest. I don't know if you're drinking a soda water, Diet Coke, or hard liquor, but whatever, 3 a.m. is 3 a.m. And you need to get into your off-season routine now. You need proper rest, you need proper diet, and we expect to see you in February at spring training day one in the quote-unquote best shape of your life, as everyone always claims to be. Well, it needs to be real this time. It cannot be an incomplete project, and that needs to be conveyed. And, of course, communication throughout the winter will be vital. There cannot be periods of time where Miguel Sano goes a week or 10 days or even more than a few days without being in touch with Twins personnel from the conditioning side, from the baseball training side. He's certainly probably going to work with Fernando Tatis again on his baseball, but let's make sure that it's in the right fashion and that he doesn't, for instance, try to go full launch angle adjustment without the Twins being aware of it when he starts taking BP. Whatever the case is, Miguel Sano, it's going to take a village to get Miguel Sano back to put all the pieces back together and get him back to the all-star form that he showed in 2017. I still think it's possible. He's 25 years old. I do think his heart is in the right place, and I think, as you mentioned, Tom, it's important not to jump to conclusions. So let's see where the rest of the offseason takes him and takes the Twins, and it will be interesting, a hugely important offseason for the Twins in so many ways, and we haven't even gotten into where things stand with Byron Buxton and their ability to make that situation right, whatever that means and however that looks. That's a topic for another episode of Midwest Swing Pod. For Tom Schreier, co-founder of Zone Coverage, for Eric Foster on the board, we thank you for listening. This is Mike Berardino, and we'll be back. You can find me at Mike Berardino on Twitter. You can find Tom at T. Schreier, right? Three on Twitter? Yeah. Yep.
And so we invite you to follow us there. We invite you to follow and subscribe to this podcast at any of your favorite podcast apps, including iTunes, Spotify, and such. And we'll be back with a fresh topic, fresh episode in 1 week. Thanks for listening.